Welcome, listeners, to the NKNews Podcast, recorded here in Seoul on October 1st, 2018. I am your host, Jacko Zwetsloot, and joining me today in the studio is Professor Ambassador Ra Jong-il. Once again, NK News is offering a free year's subscription to one reviewer who reviews our podcast, not only at iTunes, but also at other platforms. Also, you can save $50 off your NK News subscription by using the code PODCAST at the checkout. Don't forget, if you enjoy this podcast, please share it with others so that our listenership will grow. And an open appeal to our listeners, if you were present at the 13th World Festival of Youth and Students in Pyongyang in July 1989, we would like to hear from you, so please send us an email to podcast@nknews.org. Now, to introduce today's guest, Professor Ambassador Ra Jong-il is former Republic of Korea ambassador to both the United Kingdom and Japan, and now distinguished professor of international relations and political theory at Hanyang University and also at Gachon University. Dr. Ra earned his PhD in politics from the University of Cambridge in 1972, and he received both BA and MA degrees in politics from Seoul National University. He was working as a professor at Kyunghee University in Seoul before he joined ex-President Kim Dae-jung's government in 1997. In 1998, Professor Ra was appointed Deputy Director of the National Intelligence Service, the NIS, and there is much more to his biography, but I will touch on some of these individual points during the interview. So, first of all, hello, Ambassador Ra, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here, to be talking with you.
Okay, so I'd like to talk a little about your life before your career in public service. You were born during the latter years of the Japanese colonial period, and you experienced liberation, the division of Korea into two separate governments, and also the Korean War. Can you tell us how those experiences shaped your ideas about North Korea?
Okay, Before that, may I enter a little bit of corrections as to my present position? I'm a chair professor to both Gachon University and National Defense University now, and I quit Hanyang University 3 years ago.
Oh, then my apologies. My information was out of date.
No, that's not important at all. Oh, yes, talking about my experiences of last period of colonial government of Japan and also liberation and, well, it's lots of challenge to me because you see, in a little sort of booklet published both by University of Cambridge and also by Kyunghee University in Korea, I gave a little description of my experiences, and the small title of the chapter describing my experiences during that period. It was a land without justice, and also something like land of violence, land without justice, or something like that. Yes, it was a pretty violent period.
You were describing all of Korea at that time, is that correct? Okay,
sure, yeah. The last period of Japanese occupation of Korea was also pretty violent too. Almost forcible conscription of workers, soldiers, and also women for their services in Japanese Imperial Army, and a severely repressive government at that time. But there was a sort of hidden sort of resistance to that among the peasant. We lived in a small sort of farming countryside at that time, and I could feel the popular revolt, resistance against oppressive colonial government at the time. Liberation came all of a sudden. I think probably nobody in Korea expected that the liberation would come as quick as that. And to my observation, Korea was completely unprepared for that. And a chaos followed. Ideological conflict, of course. But ideological conflict itself does not explain fully the kind of chaotic situation prevailed in Korea at that time. Collapse of even an oppressive colonial government. And ensuing confusion was really critical, chaotic at the time. One thing I remember in my childhood, 92% of power plants was in North Korea, and Soviet occupying authorities cut it off. I think it was 1948, probably in the middle, May, something like May, it was cut off. All through my childhood and boyhood, we hardly had any electricity. We relied on candlelights, lamps, kerosene lamps, etc. to study. Then the war came, 1950, and that was, I wrote a little book about my experiences as a 9-year-old boy living under the occupation of North Korean army, the People's Kangaroo Court, and the reform and political educations they brought with to us. That's those things.
So how did your experiences during the Korean War shape your ideas about North Korea and the North Korean government?
The one thing very clear was that the North Korea had used to be a considerable attraction to South Korean, particularly intellectual people. Looking back to the days, had I been sort of a little older than that, like late teens, probably I would have gone to North Korea too. It was holding so much promises, expectations, and hope for particularly intellectual people.
Yeah, a lot of South Korean writers
right.
moved to...
prominent intellectuals, quite a few of them who I still very much respect, went to North Korea. And there are not many who made it good in North Korea. Some large number of them purged, either executed or sent to the countryside, etc.
Yes, I think a lot of those intellectuals would have regretted their choices in later years. Do you think so?
Right. But the war was experiences during North Korean occupation was a bit of a disappointment. Wartime. And the living was difficult, hardships, etc., accompanied by the communist-style collectivization and oppressions, repressions, and one-sided propaganda, so-called political educations, etc. That was so much disappointing to the liberal intellectuals of South Korea. I think North Korea lost quite a lot of their former popularity in South Korea by occupying and waging a war in South Korea. That was a big mistake, I think. If North Korea had not started the war, unification, or at least reconciliation between the two parts of Korea would be in a much better condition now.
Now, I remember 5 years ago, I read a paper that you wrote in 1999 titled The Politics of Conference, the Political Conference on Korea in Geneva, 26 April to 15 June 1954. And you wrote about the failed talks to try to supersede the armistice agreement with a real peace treaty between North and South Korea.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, you wrote that much of the talking and arguing was about what shape of table should be used and who should sit where.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. The title was Politics of Conference, but the official title of the conference was Political Conference. It was a parody of official title of the conference. Officially, nominally, the conference the main objective was unification of Korea, resolving political conflict or military conflict in Korean peninsula. But the participants, mostly motivated by politics, international politics as well as domestic politics. Many people, many countries wanted to be in the conference mostly for their domestic political reasons. Australia, particularly India, wanted to be a part of the conference, which was rejected by America and South Korea. Officially, India was maintaining that it has no intention to be participating in the conference if they are not welcome. But in fact, they were lobbying very hard to be. They were not invited, of course. They were not part of the conference. But still, Krishna Menon was in Geneva at the time. So was working outside of the conference, trying to exercise some influences in the proceedings.
Wow.
The difference was that Americans wanted the two-side conference. America sitting on the one side as a leader of the free world and confronting communist side. But Britain wanted kind of round the table so that it would have more maneuverability between the two. You see, there's certain sort of a position of influences, the status and the role for its own country. That was big conference until ultimately I think they settled for horseshoe shape. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to skip forward here to the early 2000s. From 2001 to 2003, you were ambassador to the United Kingdom. And at this time, you met and spoke with Consul Tae Yong-ho, who was on this podcast a few months ago. I interviewed him about his life and his book. And he writes in his memoir, which I recently read, he writes about meeting you, and he says that he knew immediately that you had a background in intelligence. He said, North Korean diplomats are trained that any South Korean diplomat who seeks out contact and desires to communicate with North Koreans is an intelligence agent. But Tae says that you spoke to him very kindly and optimistically about the relationship between the two Koreas. Of course, this was at the height of the Sunshine Policy period. What do you remember about that meeting?
Well, I do not remember that much. I mean, that must have left lots of impressions on the North Korean diplomats. But I myself have a very faint memory of. I do not even remember meeting Tae Yong-ho. I do not remember his name. Only that he reminded me of his encounter with me, and I think my intelligence background. I think that's their preconceptions. I mean,
it could be.
The South Korean diplomats were very positive at the time toward the North Koreans. And I didn't have any sort of intelligence gathering objective in approaching our North Koreans. I rather welcomed them. Yeah. And even I donated some money to the expatriates, ethnic Korean community in London. I made some private personal donations so that they could entertain when North Koreans came to London. Also, I remember organizing a small community of diplomats among three countries, China, Japan, and Korea. And we regularly met, three ambassadors. And we also met among three countries. We met for tennis games, golf games, footballs, etc. Also cultural event too. So there was a little bit of a community while I was an ambassador there. Little community of three countries there. And when I was leaving to work for new government in Korea, I left a wish that North Korea should be inducted to the community after I had left there, and but somehow, unfortunately, the community disbanded, sort of disintegrated after my departure.
At that time, how optimistic were you that North and South Korea would reach some kind of permanent peace settlement?
You see, basically, I'm an academic, political scientist. Really, I cannot say that I was ever optimistic about the prospect of real reconciliation, real sort of rapprochement, real sort of agreement between the two parts of Korea. My approach was minimalistic sort of approach. Instead of summit meeting between the two countries, I was advocating small steps, like mutually helping North Koreans to improve their quality of life. And also, we aim at, on both sides of Korea, we aim at improving our standard of ethics between the two. For instance, I'm supporting Eugene Bell Foundation.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, helping with what they call multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis.
Right, drug-resistant tuberculosis.
Yeah. Tuberculosis. I think that kind of steps between the two countries is more important than more ambitious project like creating a federation or starting to build railroad, etc., etc. Yeah, that's this.
So helping people on the ground, more sort of low-level assistance.
Yeah, my idea was minimalistic, small steps approach, and then summit meetings and the big political steps could follow much afterwards. And that was my idea, but I may be too sort of less ambitious than most Koreans.
Now, in 2004, you became ambassador to Japan.
That's right.
And you were there for 3 years.
That's right.
Now, of course, that's a tricky and difficult task for any South Korean diplomat. The relationship with South Korea and Japan is never easy. I'm sure you had many interesting experiences there, but I want to focus on North Korea when you were, since this is a North Korea-related podcast, when you were there as ambassador in Japan, did the topic of North Korea appear on your agenda a lot?
No, not really. My main mission when I was appointed to the post was concluding free trade agreement with Japan, and everything, the conditions was ripe for final step, concluding FTA. But it went quite well, and but somehow it soured. I mean, before that, we spent quite about 5-6 years studied outside of the government, and finally the studies, government level studies too. And we all agreed inside Korea as well as between Japan and Korea, we all agreed to conclude that final steps. And the mission was given me when the president appointed me to Japan, and I thought it was a relatively easy job to do. But somehow, as we were discussing the details related to the free trade agreement, the problems, so many problems arose, like free trade in agricultural product, which Korea had some advantage over Japan. And like automobile, Japan had sort of advantage over. So in general, everything was agreeable. But then in details, there were conflicts. Ultimately, political problem was about the Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Koizumi, visiting Yasukuni Shrine.
Yes.
That was relatively a minor problem, but then the good atmosphere soured, and we didn't get any closer to a conclusion of a free trade agreement.
Now, Japan, with regard to the Korean community living in Japan, that's somewhat of a unique situation there, because you've got these two competing groups, very much in tension with each other. You have the Korean group that is in favor of the North Korean regime, that's a member of the Jocheongnyeon group, and then you have the Koreans who are in favor of the South Korean government.
Right.
I've forgotten the name of it. The Minda, yes. Did you see any of that sort of tension or conflict while you were there?
No, not really. First of all, they put things in correct sort of perspective. Neither organization really represent a substantial part of ethnic Korean population in Japan. Ethnic Korean population are very nationalistic, largely due to the fact that they had been living there for a long time, serving the country in various capacities. However, they had been discriminated against, never given any chance to participate in any political activities, etc. So both are very nationalistic, but they do not really represent a substantial part of Korean community in Japan. And another thing is that both of them are under direct control from their own government. And they have very small sort of leeway, very small area in which they can be autonomous. That's the real trouble. But one thing I did for the reconciliation is that somehow I helped two organizations to agree on to the rapprochement. And for some time, several months, I think, they adhered to the agreement that they would try to live in
good neighbors.
Cooperate with one another, and do not fight against each other, that sort of things. The help, the coexistence, mutual sort of friendship, etc. But that was broken after 3-4 months at best. Another thing is that I was on good terms with Joseon organization too. Their sort of strong point is that they had been concentrating on education.
Yes, they have their own schools and even a university, don't they?
Yeah. most of the Korean ethnic community, the people who can speak Korean language is from Joseon educations, and I valued that. And I employed in my embassy the graduates from Joseon schools.
Was that controversial, that decision?
A little bit, but not too much.
Were they Japanese citizens?
No. They are neither Japanese citizens nor the South Korean citizenship. But they didn't cause any trouble. Another thing is that I visited sometimes the Joseon schools.
Oh, yeah.
They gave talks, and also I arranged matchmaking. I did matchmaking between Joseon people's children and Korean children, and presided over their wedding.
Now, I'd like to move on to talk about your two books that you've published in recent years. The first one that I'm thinking about, published in 2013, is about Captain Gang Min-chol, the last surviving participant in the Burma bombing of 1983, which, for the listeners who are not aware, this was an attempt by North Korea to wipe out South Korea's President John Doo-hwan and his cabinet during a visit to Rangoon. And Captain Gang was the only person who ever admitted involvement in the bombing.
Right.
North Korea to this day still denies any participation in that act. Now, in your book, you describe Gang as one of the countless young men sacrificed in the long rivalry between the two Koreas and then forgotten. Why did you choose to write a book about Gang?
Well, he's a terrorist, and he committed a heinous crime, of course, killing so many people. On the other hand, you could also look at him as a victim of a conflict between the two parts of Korea. Legally, of course, he's a criminal man, a very serious criminal too. However, looking at him from historical or political point, more moral, ethnic point of view, can we really accuse him only as a criminal? Are we not responsible for what happened to him? And he was recruited to North Korean army at the age of 18. And then he was so good, athletic as well as intelligent. So he's recruited again to special sort of organization of the army, special forces. It's a hard training, really, sort of probably one of the toughest training, most tough training. And he was sent to Myanmar to assassinate John Doo-hwan, and he thought it was a righteous act to kill a tyrant like John Doo-hwan. I'm pretty sure that even in South Korea, there was quite a few people who wanted to kill him for what he did in Gwangju, 1980. So it is not that strange. It is not that surprising that Gang Min-chol was likewise was motivated by that too. Apart from, in addition to official sort of instructions, mission given him. Later he repented. Later in the prison, he came to know so many things, and he became aware of the fact that North Korea, in cold blood, sort of completely forgot about him, sort of abandoned him altogether. Didn't move a finger to save him from imprisonment or that kind of thing. Completely denied that North Korea had anything to do with that. However, we cannot accuse him simply as a terrorist, given objective conditions of Korea at that time. He was wounded. Lost one arm and sustained wounds throughout his body.
Was that from the bomb explosion, or?
That's right. What happened was that in an encounter with the Myanmar military people,
yes,
he was about to throw his hand grenade. What happened to him and to his another colleague was that as soon as he pulled off the pin, it exploded in his own hand. Both of them sustained lost one arm, left arms, killing three. Gang Min-chol survived, mainly by sort of volunteering all the informations. He confessed that how he came to Myanmar and to kill John Doo-hwan. So he lived alone in Myanmar prison, insane prison, for 15 years before I obtained the permission to make contact with him. I had been interested in him for a long time. because you see, I was a little bit sort of sad about the fate of this young man.
Yeah.
And I interviewed later.
Because he was abandoned by both the government of North Korea and the government of South Korea, wasn't he?
Of course.
Nobody claimed him as their own. Nobody wanted anything to do with him.
Yeah. That's something which I feel really unhappy about, our whole idea of nationhood and the unification. In our idea of nationhood, in our idea of unification, we do not have any idea of human beings. It's just abstract entity like a nation, Korea as a nation. We lived together for 5,000 years. So what? And also in unification, you see the Korean flag, the peninsula flag. It's just a geography. There is no idea about human beings, what we are going to do about ourselves. Like what? Like peace, reconciliation, no idea of human well-being, human rights, or nothing like that. Just a land that I feel unhappy about. Our prevalent idea of nationhood as well as unification. And also this particular person of Kang Min-chul, I think probably I was the only one among so-called 70 million Koreans who paid any attention to this young, unhappy young man.
You mean nobody else ever visited him or wrote to him or sent him anything?
Nobody cared for him. And some people thought of him for political reason. I mean, as a witness of North Korean terrorism. My idea was as a human being. Yeah. He told his cellmates that he never had any experiences of so far as touching the hand of opposite sex. And his diarist wish was to get married. He thought probably wedding is all that great. That somehow touched my the feelings. I tried very hard to somehow take him out of the prison. I tried official sources, non-government sources, etc., without any success. I mean, nobody paid any attention to him when he died.
When did he die?
He died 2011 or something. No, a little earlier than that. So I decided to bring him back to life by writing a book. And that was the only thing I could do for him.
Now, your more recent book from 2016 is called The Path Taken by Jang Sung-taek, a rebellious outsider.
You seem to read so many of my books.
Well, I haven't read this one yet, but I'm aware of it. So Jang, of course, for our listeners home, is the man who married the sister of Kim Jong Il.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Who fell foul of his nephew Kim Jong Un and was executed in December 2013 by anti-aircraft guns. So how is Jang similar or different from Kang Min-chul?
Yes, he was interesting figure. In a way, similar to Kang Min-chul, a victim of the regime, the conditions of regime. When Kim Jong Il passed away, 2011, most of the North Korean experts in South Korea were thinking that, were looking forward to the times that Jang Sung-taek's power would grow. It would be the influential element in North Korean politics. No, the moment Kim Jong Il passed away, I could almost feel, be sure that the end of Jang Sung-taek is very near. And I even said in private conversations, I said that probably I would give him 2 years maximum.
And you're right.
Yes. According to expression of a journalist friend of mine, I was wrong by 1 week. But I didn't. I mean, it was sort of guesswork. But I thought probably for the first year they would be in good relations because the new leader would have to rely on Jang Sung-taek. But from the second year, the conflict would start. That would be end of Jang Sung-taek. And I remember I was asked by my friends, so what would you recommend to him? I sort of prescribed three courses. One is that complete retirement from politics, complete rustification. going to the countryside and live there alone, excusing himself on account of his physical conditions, etc. That would not be feasible. Another thing is he makes himself completely sort of uninfluential, like the others, become a mere sort of puppet or like that. Didn't try to get involved in any important decisions of the government, etc. That would not be feasible again. What I would have advised him had I had a chance of meeting with him was fleeing the country and setting up the government in exile.
A government in exile.
In China, for instance. I mean, that would have been feasible. Not anti-North Korean. Real North Korean regime, setting up a real North Korea. North Korea had a good start, as we were talking before. Anti-feudalism, anti-feudalistic oppressions, the equality between the two sexes, and also anti-imperialism and equality, etc. Good start, but somehow it degenerated into unrepublican, undemocratic country. I remember joking to a group of journalists that Napoleon, when he became assumed the throne, became an emperor, some people became very critical of him. Beethoven, for instance. But Napoleon was saying that I didn't steal crown. The crown was in the gutter at the time. So I just picked up. Nobody wanted that. So Jang Sung-taek probably could say the same thing, that the People's Democratic Republic is in the gutters. So I had to pick it up to start. Even if it fails, he could live on in history as a good sort of project. The real democratic socialist republic, people's republic, etc. Real North Korea, not anti-North Korean regime.
Now, in that book, you claim that Kim Jong Il did not intend for his son, Kim Jong-un, to succeed him after he died.
I think he played with so many ideas about that. He knew that the second time, generate the dynastic
succession.
Succession of power was not really suitable for a republic, democratic people's republic. So I think he played with so many ideas. One was that I heard that from a very reliable source, that he played with the idea of collective leadership and reserving for his family the status similar to that of imperial Japanese household.
So a kind of figurehead.
That's right. But symbol of the state, authority of state, and object of the loyalty and respect from the population. Much safe for his family. Another thing, when he was thinking of leaving his power to one of his offsprings, the danger is that, as he did himself, arrogating, sort of undermining most of his own power, the people would be listening to heir apparent instead of the ruling power himself, particularly when he was getting older and weaker in health, etc. So he put it up as long as possible to appoint any successor to him.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about conspiracy theories. Is there a tendency in Korea to believe in conspiracy theories? For example, on the right, we have the conspiracy theory that North Korean special forces were in Gwangju in 1980, guiding and leading the democracy movement. And on the left, the sinking of the Cheonan was staged by the government, or the blowing up of Korean Airlines Flight 858 in 1987 wasn't done by North Korean agents. Is there a tendency not to accept the government's narrative on North Korea or other areas?
It's a natural kind of phenomenon, conspiracy theory, and we are all sort of easily tempted to that kind of interpretation of what happened. And a good definition of conspiracy theory is that it is impotent or weak people's idea of what happened. And Gwangju incident, I'll not be surprised to find any North Korean agents in the event. However, that's not important thing. it is likely that North Korea wanted to have some influences in the movement, but that's not the cause. That's not the real sort of the problem. What happened in Gwangju incident? If you ascribe all those what happened in Gwangju to North Korean intervention agencies, etc., that's the sort of conspiracy theory. The same with Cheonan. I think government worked rather hard to prove that it really happened by North Korean. It was retaliation, I think. Retaliation against what happened just before that. The second, third Yeonpyeong, the naval battle.
West Sea naval battle,
yeah. That was, North Korean Navy is no match in a normal sort of confrontation with South Korea. So they had to devise some exceptional sort of device to take their revenge.
As far as we know, are there still North Korean spies operating in South Korea today?
I think so. Yes. That is quite normal, I think.
Do you think South Korea still sends agents to North Korea?
That is extremely difficult to... but both countries naturally has intelligence services, intelligence gathering functions and organizations too. And I'm not surprised. But North Korea has in a much more favorable conditions to gather intelligence informations from South Korea. But I'm not sure, according to my experiences working in intelligence service, I do not believe that is it that much of a help to either side.
Now, because our time together is almost at an end today, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the present day developments, and I need to ask you to restrict your answer to 30 seconds or less. So, what are your thoughts on the recent North-South summit, the third one that we had?
Oh, that's a great development, I think. At least, yes. It's much better than talking about war, fire and fury, etc. But it's good. But again, we shouldn't be carried away by our hopes instead of looking at hard reality of the situations.
So once again, would you say that, like in 2001, that you're not optimistic? You are looking at you prefer to focus on the low-level assistance to North Korea.
That's my preference. However, this isn't bad at all. I mean, but again, we should refrain from carried away by hopes and the rosy sort of prospect. And in every historical event, there are changes, element of changes as well as continuity. So we should be able to look at both aspects of any important historical happenings.
Do you think North Korean denuclearization is likely?
No evidence. At the moment, there is no hard evidence that they have decided on that. Only speech, only what they are talking about. Yes, that's better than saying that we are going to keep our nuclear weapons at whatever the cost. However, there is no hard evidence that they have really changed. And again, as a political scientist, it would be quite surprising, quite sort of something very, very new in human affairs that people can change that suddenly. I do not believe even Kim Jong Un has definitely set his mind upon on any final conclusion. Is he going to denuclearize, give up nuclear weapons?
Well, that brings me to my final question. Can we know anything about Kim Jong-un's intentions? What do you think he wants for his country, for his people?
Let's put it this way. His difficulty is that he cannot keep his weapons. He cannot keep his cake and eat it too. Mm-hmm. He cannot keep his nuclear weapons and keep the country in a constantly underdeveloped state. Yeah. He has to give up one thing, but that is not also that easy. And even if he gets all the good sort of concessions from Americans, it would be extremely difficult to expose himself to the outside world given the state of his regime as it is now. The difficulty is that he wishes to be treated by outside the international community as one of the normal countries, for which he would be required to open up the country to outside influences. And so far they had kept themselves in maintaining one-way traffic, one-way communication. They broadcast out to the outside world, but they do not take any communications from the outside world. Now they have to open it both ways, and that will be extremely difficult. The movement of people, a large number of people moving inside to the outside and also inside the country, and also allowing the country to freely mix up with the other people from other countries, that will require a lot of sort of difficulty. I do not know how the country is going to deal with this difficulty.
Well, thank you once again, Ambassador Ra Jong Il, for coming today on the podcast.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Not at all. Don't forget, listeners, you can listen to all of our shows as well as read full bios and show notes on our website, www.nknews.org. NK News is the leading repository of North Korean news, research and analysis, and we hope to see you there. And you can send feedback, comments, questions or guest suggestions to podcast@nknews.org. Our podcast was produced by Arias Dare and facilitated by Chad O'Carroll and Christina Lee. And if you enjoy this podcast, please share with your friends and neighbors so that they can listen too. Thank you, and listen again next time.